Vamos então iniciar esta conferência ISCTE-IUL, Configurações Globais da Polónia e sobre a Polónia, com um segundo painel sobre a Polónia e o lado europeu. So I would like to introduce our guests. This is a second session of this international conference. We'll have a slight modification to the initial program. So Professor Lisbon, he is president of the Stability Wall Observatory, was meant to speak during the first panel, but we asked him to do this panel as his presentation will be aimed of focusing international relations, an international relations point of view more than an economic one like one we had in the first panel. So we'll start with Professor Luís Fraga, then followed by Professor Maria Raquel Freire, coming from the Faculty of Economy from the University of Coimbra, and the researcher at the CEI-Iscte, Center for International Studies for Social Studies in Coimbra. And our last speaker will be Professor Daniel Rodrigues, also from the Faculty of Economy of the University of Coimbra, and a member of Observare at the WAL in Lisbon. So the floor is yours, Professor Fraga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm not going to sit down because actually I'm accustomed to speak standing. The main reason for that is that I'm not coming from the academic world. I would like to correct our distinguished moderator. I'm not a professor. I come from the politics. I'm not an academic. I come from the field action, as I'm going to explain further on. But first of all, first words I would like to say is that it's a great honor for me to have been invited by the Institute for Eastern Studies from Poland. It's not the first time I'm with you, and it's a honor for me to be here. Well, of course, it might help. That's permitted to me. It's a great honor for me to be here, first of all, because all the meetings, all the international conferences that have been organized by the Institute for Eastern Studies have shown me that they always choose people with level, as we can see here today. So that's the first reason I'm very glad to be here. The second reason I'm glad to be here is that I'm in Portugal. Portugal is a country I love. I've been many times here. I'm Spaniard, feel at home in Portugal, and all my experiences in Portugal, politically, working together with Portugal, have been a great satisfaction for me. So it's great to be here in Portugal, in this Instituto Universitario de Lisboa. I also congratulate the rector and the professors from this institute who have organized with the Institute for Eastern Studies this international conference. But there's a third reason that it's a honor for me to be here, but I'm going to tell it later. So we speak about Poland, about Spain, about Portugal. There are three countries that have very, very common spirit. I'm going to say three similarities that share Portugal, Poland, and Spain. And then, first similarity, we are Catholics. Portugal is Catholic, Poland is Catholic, Spanish is Catholic. Someone may say, oh, that's not important. Yes, it is, because it's a part of the culture. It's a kind of feeling culturally and from the civilization point of view, the world. So that's the first similarity we have. The second similarity we have is that we three countries are threshold countries, are border countries. Portugal is at the one time part of Europe, and it's a very important country in Europe, but also Portugal is a part of the Lusophone, the great community of the Portuguese-speaking countries from Brazil to Macau, from Timor East to Angola. So Portugal is a country which is a threshold country. The same can be said about Spain with the South American countries, and the same about Poland, because Poland is also part of Europe, but also part of the Slavic world. So that's this threshold condition of our countries make it very interesting, the meeting we are going to have here. And it's a meeting which title is Yes, We Could. So I speak about another similarity about our three countries. Look at our countries 40 years ago. And 40 years ago it was a disastrous situation for all our three countries. But now Portugal has done it, Spain has done it. We had a transition from not democratic regimes to democratic regimes. We were underdeveloped, now we're developed. The same can be said about Poland. For them it was more difficult because they didn't have what we had in Portugal and Spain, which was middle class, which was the basis on which we constructed our future development. They didn't. So it was more difficult for you, but you did it. And that's the main reason we are here, to present this report. Yes, we could. Yes, you've done it. Congratulations. Well done, Poland. And you can be proud about your achievements. But what of the outcomes of this success? There's no other. It's a success for Poland. And that's what I'm going to speak about. That Poland is a key factor of the stability of Europe. And that's the point I'm going to stress. Poland is a key factor of stability in Europe. Now, when we speak about stability in Europe, in Eastern Europe, what are we talking about? Are we talking about some problem in Lithuania, in Estonia? Are we talking about some problem in Slovakia? No. I mean, yes, we have cited newspapers to know that the main problem of stability in Europe right now is Ukraine, a very similar country to Poland. It was pointed out in the last panel that 40 years ago, no, not 40 years ago, in 1989, the economic and social and political situation in Poland and Ukraine was very similar. No, that's a similarity, but it was 30 years ago. The language is also very similar. Ukraine is somewhere in between the Russian and Polish. Some words are very similar to Polish, some words are very similar to Russian. But Poland and Ukraine have a shared history. Sometimes they were enemies, sometimes one invaded the other. But now Poland will be a key factor of stability for Ukraine. And that's what I'm going to very briefly go. I'm sure there are going to be some questions by the distinguished audience. But when we speak about the stability of Ukraine, we have to ask ourselves, well, has Ukraine had the same success as Poland? And the answer is no. They don't have a middle class. They don't have a territorial structure as Poland has developed it. And they don't have the institutional framework that successfully has built Poland. Why? Of course, there's a very bad political class. Politicians in Ukraine are linked to economic interests, the so-called oligarchs. It could be a very long list of factors that have done that in Ukraine. But as I have only 50 minutes, I'm going to say 5 pieces. I'm not an academic. I come from the politics. I was 21 years in the Spanish Parliament, and 12 of them I was the president of the Ibero-American Committee of the Spanish Senate. That's why I was involved in peace building process in El Salvador. I was the president also in Guatemala of the Spanish delegation of the peace agreements. Now I'm involved in Colombia. And I was also the founder, together with Leonid Kozhara, who was then the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine, of the parliamentary working group between Spain and Ukraine. So my statements are not going to be theoretical. However, I'm going to try to say 5 theses. It's rather a proposition, let's say. And 5 thesis number 1 is that there's not going to be a second Cold War. There's some newspapers speaking about that, writing a lot. Okay, they can write. There's not going to be such a thing. Mainly because the ideological factor, which was the key factor in the Soviet Union, doesn't exist. But there's another reason, a very key reason, which is that what the Germans call it the Zeitgeist, what means the spirit of the times, is totally different. There was a question by the public about Stalin and Hitler. Well, Stalin and Hitler, they were product of their times, of the spirit of their times. But now we are a totally different part of the history. Now we have other technologies. Now the world is totally interconnected by internet. We are living in a totally different world. So, well, you're saying no, but maybe later we can discuss it. It was you who raised the question. So that's a thesis. Can be right, can be not right. I'm totally convinced about that. Second thesis, that it's not in the interest of Europe, nor in Russian interest, that there is a second Cold War. It's not only not in the interest of Europe and Russia, it's also not the interest, it's not the national interest of the US. So this takes us to the third thesis. And the third thesis is that sanctions against Russia are a mistake. It was Sikorski, by the way, the Polish foreign minister, who in March of this year said that publicly. He was not very sure that the right way was the sanctions. Now the sanctions have conducted us to a spiral of defense attack. And who's the loser of that is, of course, Russia, but also mainly Europe. So that's thesis number 3, which conducts us to thesis number 4. The solution can only be done by pragmatism, a great deal of pragmatism. Pragmatism was actually one of the key factors that had Portugal, Poland, and Spain for the transition. It was pragmatism. It was also that we believed in ourselves that pragmatism was a very important point. So without pragmatism, we're not going to go to any solution. If some people of the public, because time is limited, wants to ask me for which solution I think for the Ukrainian conflict, then I don't know if it's going to be a thesis, but I'll try to say something. Then thesis number 5 and last. Poland, no doubt, is going to be a key factor in the stability of the area. I'm totally convinced about that. You actually understand better Russia than the rest of Europe, and you understand very well Ukraine, better than anyone. That said, I also might venture 2 forecasts. And the first one concerns Poland. The first forecast I would try to venture is that I'm sure that sooner than later the bilateral relation between Poland and Russia is going to get better and better and better. Europe's needed, Poland needed, Russia needs. So that's the first forecast. But you know, forecasts are by definition wrong. Distrust anyone who claims he knows the future. He might be wrong. I don't know that's going to happen. But knowing that I'm a politician, we also can say a forecast in order to say an opinion. Second forecast. Here I finished 60 minutes moderator. I think it's 50 minutes. I've done it, even 20. Well, okay. So I finish with that. Second forecast is that sooner or later, Europe is going to understand the role of Ukraine. And there are 2 ways to understand Ukraine. Either Europe understands that Ukraine is a key country for the relation with Russia, same as Poland. That means Europe understands the geopolitical of our continent, the continental geopolitics. But maybe Europe also can think, well, Ukraine is just a place for cheap labor, for cheap materials, for transport of gas. Depending on how you answer that question, you will have one policy or another. But I'm sure that Poland is for the first option, and that's why Poland is a key factor of stability. Again, Poland, congratulations, you've done it, well done, and I'm sure you're going to be a key factor of the stability in Europe. Thank you very much to all of you for your attention.
Sure, there will be a lot of questions. We are going to have all the questions at the end of the three interventions. So I will immediately pass the word to Professor Laginha.
Thank you so much. Can you listen to me this way? Yes. I would like to, because I'll speak to my notes usually I start talking, and so to make sure that I'll tell everything I want to tell in 15 to 20 minutes. I'll just kind of give a look to my notes. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be here and for hosting this event, which is truly important regarding the times that we are living at the moment. And basically what I'm going to try to do this afternoon is to I'll always be a little bit in between past and future in the sense of looking at how this relationship, EU-Russia relations, have been evolving and where we can go next, or where we can find a way out of this crisis and a way out of the problems that have come up to this relationship. So the question that I included in the title of this presentation: could we do it differently? So, before I start into substantial issues, there are 2 or 3 points I would like to make. The first one, we should always remember when we talk about EU and Russia that we are talking about an international organization that's 28 and about a state. And so when we talk about foreign policy or defense issues, of course we look at a much more united, cohesive version on the side of Russia than on the side of the EU. And as Luis was talking, there was a lot of divergence within the EU regarding that has been always regarding relations with Russia, and the crisis in Ukraine came to make this even more clear. And so we have to take into account this factor. The second note I would like to make is that relations between Russia and the EU have had many ups and downs. And the fact that the partnership and cooperation agreement expired in 2007 already, and we are in 2014, and there has been not a new agreement to replace this one, is very significant in terms of the status of this relationship and of the difficulties the parties have been had for a long time in terms of the way they relate. So clearly there's been a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions along the way. And the third note has to do with the capabilities expectations in the sense of how we connect discourse and actions. And basically there has been a lot of talk between EU and Russia, but when we get to everything walking the walk, not really, I can say. Okay, having said this, I'll try to dig a little bit on this relationship on the basis of readings about the other, which have been a lot out there, and the context for this. But I always depart from the assumption that change is possible. So I'm here with a kind of trying to look at some possibilities, let's say, in face of a very difficult current context. So when we look at Russia, we we can briefly describe Russian foreign policy as multifactorial in the sense, the Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS, is the primary area of actuation. It intends to be developed in what the Russians call a polycentric international system, and there is clearly a goal of affirmation of Russia at the regional and global levels. Let's put it this way. And conceptually, foreign policy has been consolidated, and in normative terms also. We find many references to principles of sovereignty, non-interference, international law, how to do the UN Charter, and this polycentrism, etc. But somehow, Russian policies and the recent crisis in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea clearly reveal some dualism in the way Russia pursues its sovereignist agenda. Because clearly is a sovereignist power in the sense that it's always for sovereignty and non-interference. But in this case, things were different, and there was a clear action in terms of how it's acted in Ukraine. Sorry. What is important here, I think, is when you look at what has been called, and I'll put it into commas, the shared neighborhoods, different projects that of the EU and that of Russia overlap. And in this overlap, we have moments of cooperation, but also moments of clear competition, and where there are real clashes. And it's very interesting when we look at the way both of these actors talk about these neighborhoods. Basically, the EU developed, as you know, the neighborhood policy and Eastern partnership with the aim of building this arch of solidarity around its borders, with the idea that if we build stability in our neighborhoods, we will also contribute to stability within our borders. The thing is that Russia interpreted these European policies as interfering in an area proximately important to its policies. And the thing is that Russia is doing basically the same. So it also departs from the understanding that for more stability within Russia, we need stability in our neighborhoods. And so the Russians also have policies and approaches towards this area. And that's when these policies clash, that things get more complicated. And basically, what has been many times an interpretation has been, we are reading this like Russia is meddling or European Union is meddling around, and we see many times these one-sided approaches. And I don't believe this is really the best way to look at this area and the dynamics taking place here, because they, to a very great extent, result from interaction of two different models that are competing in this particular area. And so this brings me to an idea of how we conceive Europe and the role of Russia and EU in Europe. And basically, Russia has been promoting this idea of greater Europe. I think you have already heard about this. It means basically that Russia is a central player along with other players such as the EU and Turkey, for example. So it is talking about a multipolar Europe, if you want, or multi-order Europe, as SACPA has termed it. And when you look at the proposal for the European Security Treaty, for example, it is very much this greater Europe idea that is embedded in the Russian proposal. And this leads to an understanding of the EU as an hegemonic power that is pursuing exclusivist policies. And so in Russia, the DNP and the EP are understood as excluding itself from these processes. How does the EU see this. Basically, the EU recognizes or perceives Russia as a European power, let's say, a European power, built a strategic partnership that is somehow socialized in European multilateral formats. It is a member of the OSCE, it had a place at the NATO Russia Council, for example, and all the things like this. But basically, that Russia has been resisting socialization processes and engaging in some of the, especially the values, let's say, that are put forward by the EU. And so it reads a little bit as not so much an option, but more an imposition, this relationship, which is interesting. The US being very criticized also in its relations, just like Russia criticizes a lot the EU about this imposition and hegemonic posture. The US has been very much criticized for the approach that has been adopted towards Russia. At some point, this policy of constructive engagement that has been put forward seemed more like needs than really a policy that was believed or a choice. And also, to some extent, the way the bureaucracy in Brussels functions many times doesn't have into account the capability, the ability, whatever, of Russia to understand and implement some procedures. So we have, these conflicting discourses, these conflicting understandings that clearly have been pointing to some of these disagreements and to some of these problems that we see in this relationship. So basically, is there room for cooperation between the EU and Russia in face of all these different readings, these different discourses? So I would say yes. Let's see. First point I would like to make has to do with the role of norms and discourses and the distance from policies to implementation. Look at how we understand so differently concepts such as democracy. Democracy within the European Union is understood in very broad terms, is very inclusive. In Russia, democracy is a very narrow concept, basically related to the building of elections. And here we have clearly a very different reading about democracy as a value. So we sign it in joint documents, but then when it comes to practice, we have different ways of interpreting many of these concepts. So the first thing we need to do is get to the basics. We need to really understand what we are talking about and define a kind of a common language, clarify what is the object and subject of our relations, and try to bridge some of these concepts and create somehow a concurrent narrative. That when we sign a joint declaration, for example, we are signing exactly the same document and reading it in the same way. So we should go beyond somehow a one-sided approach and try to build some consensus regarding language and contents. My second point has to do with something that Luis highlighted and I think is fundamental. It has to do with this language of divide and the perpetuation of a rhetoric building on the old Cold War and that the Cold War is back, this kind of divisive rhetoric that pushes further this dichotomy, we, the other, and these readings about the enemy, all this kind of discourse, which contributes to ratify even more difference and is not really contributing, I would say, to bring us together, but instead to make us apart. Of course, Ukraine contributed a lot to this divide and the way the political rhetoric and discourse became so exacerbated also contributed to this. But relations between the EU and Russia have to be broader and go beyond this. And a third point like to make, almost there, is about security. And how this has to be a centerpiece, let's say, in the EU-Russia agenda. And I think Ukraine clearly testifies to this need to bring security to the forefront. This fact about the shared neighborhoods within Kaunas always being an area of contention, Ukraine is showing that, Georgia showed that, also points, I would say, a lot to this point. So I would say we need to find a middle way. It's not easy, but a kind of hybrid form of relationship where we can combine and adapt practices from both sides, and not only talking about that maybe specific reorganization or Russification. We don't need to be always, in these dichotomous lines of analysis, not always one-sided, but talking about socialization in a more encompassing way, if I can make myself clear, and try from there to build on this relationship without always this thing about imposing ways of doing, imposing ways of reading. So basically I would say this imposition will basically not work, and we will repeatedly go into the double standards criticism, and we will be into that loop and not easily get out of it. So basically it's important to work and build on what brings us together, the EU and Russia. So we should work to promote a space for dialogue that might lead to critical understanding. How could we do this? Or where can I see some windows of opportunity? When we look at the status of this relationship today, it's really at a low point. Probably it has never been so bad as it is now. But there are some technical issues that keep going in terms of negotiation and dialogue. For example, when you talk about technical issues related to cross-border cooperation or counterterrorism, there are still some issues, let's say, on the agenda and going on. Recently I was talking to a Russian diplomat, and it was very clear that probably the area of dialogue that is kind of going on at the moment in a more cooperative tone is counterterrorism. Basically, there is an understanding that we have all to gain from this, and this is an area that has been there. Energy has always been there, and the recent agreement between Ukraine and Russia, which has been very criticized, of course, it has been differently understood, but it shows how relations of dependence and interdependence in energy matters do matter in our relations, and how we have to address these issues. So basically what I'm saying is pointing to a technicalization and depoliticization of the relationship, in the sense that probably this is a way for a restart, let's say, after what has been happening. And so looking at this relationship through a different prism, where probably values can be left to a second stage, let's say, when compatibility is again built. Of course, to move on, the issue of Ukraine has to be managed somehow, and we have to find a political solution to what's happening there. Sanctions have to be lifted, and only then we can move forward in terms of how we will build or rebuild again our dialogue. But basically, and this is my last word, Russia is a big neighbor of the EU. The EU is a big neighbor of Russia. And this is geopolitics are there, and this is a reality we have to live with. And we said very clearly that no one has interest in just turning the back to the other, in the sense that we share borders, we share common problems, we share common challenges, so we also share common opportunities. So in this sense, it is important to keep dialogue going and if possible try to bring some substance to this dialogue which is
Thank you, Raquel. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions starting with your neighbor. But we'll now turn to Daniel, please. And the floor is yours.
First of all, for joining the slides, the nice of the conference for inviting me to participate in this event about a very important issue at the moment. As stated by the title of my presentation, I will try to look at the role the economy play nowadays, essentially it was 1989 in Central and Eastern Europe. I will essentially look at the question of Polish foreign policy and more concretely to the East. So, to start, we have to say that in 1989, Central and Eastern Europe, what we had was an analysis of the geographical factor. I mean that there was no geographical unity between the Central and Eastern European countries. So, the perception that we had, the only kind of unity, if you want to say it, by the countries of the region, was that they feel as being part of the West. So, what was stressed immediately by all those countries was that it was very important for them to become part of Western and transatlantic political structures. So, the European Community and NATO. There was also the need to promote some kind of regional integration outside any kind of German or Russian umbrella, that naturally because of historical reasons. And also, what we have seen in the beginning of the 90s was the emergence of several sub-regional organizations promoting cooperation with the countries. So we had, for example, the Central European Initiative, immediately in 1999, the Visegrad Group in 1991, the Central European Free Trade Agreement, 1992, and also in 1992, the Council of the Baltic States. So Poland became part of all these regional organizations, all of them with different purposes, but all of them seeking this cooperation with the states of parts of what was called Eastern Europe. In the case of Poland, you see that the post-communist Polish foreign policy main trends were trying to do to these issues. So regional integration, essentially through the Visegrad Group, constituted in 1991 with Slovakia and Hungary, which is now the V4, the split Slovakia. European integration, so a so-called return to Europe with the Weimar Triangle, with France and Germany. France being seen a traditional ally of Poland, but also Germany seen as a strong power in European politics. Following the reunification of Germany, so this power was even bigger. And also the EU membership in 2004. On the other side, the importance of the reinforcement of transatlantic relations. So Poland applied to NATO, become a member of NATO in 1999, and participated in several operations abroad, namely in Iraq. So, Poland tried to come back to West, to come back to what was considered to be part of Polish history. Another very important issue in the stabilization of relations with Germany was the international recognition of the organized line as the official German-Polish border. So trying to stabilize relations with its closest neighbors. Naturally, the East was traditionally a sphere of influence of Poland. This importance of the East was seen, namely, in the fast recognition of the Baltic States' independence. Poland was one of the first countries to do so. There is still nowadays a special relationship with Lithuania, despite some tensions, also due to historical factors, for example, the occupation of Vilnius in 1990. But the history of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is a strong line between these two countries. Also, the promotion of democratic values in its close neighborhood, so Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus. So in the Polish foreign policy doctrine, the ULP doctrine, that Ukraine, Lithuania, and Belarus became a main trend for Polish diplomacy towards the East. And as I said before, the question of relations with the Russian Federation. These relations are difficult, but there is this need of good relationship between Warsaw and Moscow, and both of them recognize this need. So there were some attempts to reset these relations, namely 2 or 3 years ago. We had, for example, the visit of the Orthodox Patriarch Kirill to Poland. So trying to establish some relations between the two countries at the eye level. But historically, what we can see is that Poland has this suspicion toward Russia, and Russia has also some kind of suspicion toward Poland. When we see the negotiations at the eye level, politics, diplomacy, Poland effectively tries to build this bridge between Russia and the European Union. However, what we see is that Moscow deals directly with Brussels, with London, with Paris, with Berlin, and not with Poland. And by doing so, it is considering Poland a minor actor at the international scene and as a member state of the EU. So, one of the main instruments of this Polish foreign policy towards the East is the Eastern Partnership, which was constituted as part of the European neighborhood policy. It was officially launched in 2009 at the Prague Summit as part of this work program of the EU. This initiative is mainly directed to 6 countries of the Eastern European periphery: Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And what we can see is that Poland tries to invest a lot of efforts in its mechanism. And effectively, despite the fact that it was created during the Czech presidency of the European Council, it was mainly promoted by Sweden and Poland. So, despite the difficulties of this mechanism, Poland actually had a strong commitment to the Eastern Partnership with several purposes: the conclusion of bilateral agreements, the preparation of free trade agreements, facilitating these regimes, the cooperation in some sectorial and emerging fields, and also the consolidation of the state, democratic institutions, and the civil society. The Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs invests a lot in the promotion of civil society, namely in Belarus, namely in Ukraine, which are the main targets of this policy. When we look at the official documents of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland, we can see that the regional cooperation dimension is central. We see several references to the need to some opening and solidarity with the East. We see a strong support to the European Neighborhood Partnership countries' membership ambitions. And Poland tries to do that not only as a single actor, but also using these European channels, but also some other organizations like the V4, the Visegrad Group. So trying to talk as a bloc with other countries supporting these memberships. So also trying to promote the membership of the countries of the Western Balkans, for example. There is also a strong emphasis in the question of the development cooperation, as well on democracy and human rights promotion. A strong emphasis on partnership and cooperation with the Polish diaspora of the region. Once again, we cannot forget that historically the the western parts of Ukraine, Belarus, and some parts of Lithuania, what about Poland. So there are still strong Polish minorities in the region, and there is a need of cooperation between the states. Once again, the importance of a dialogue between the EU and Russia. So Poland trying to be this bridge. Once again, we can look at this question of Poland and Ukraine. This is the one which is more actual or more recent. And Poland has a strong commitment to the Ukrainian membership of the EU, and that's since 2004. This is the moment to be getting European member. So, following the Euromaidan events, we have seen a strong Polish diplomatic force urging the EU membership of Ukraine. We are at several high level, which is not of Poland saying that, but Ukraine should become immediately a member of the EU. We have a project of a battle group constituted by Polish, Ukrainian, and Lithuanian troops, which was made for the first time in 2007. And now, following the Romanian events, we are hearing again about this proposal. So, a battle group composed by troops of these three countries, but also the proposal of instituting a battle group of the Visegrad Group, also with some cooperation with Ukraine. Still, what we can see in Polish foreign policy, and what is one of the main reasons of the different trends we can find, is that it's a security issue. Historically, Poland looks at Russia as an enemy. So following the events in Ukraine, we can see that Poland fears that there can be some expansion towards West, not necessarily towards Poland, but for example towards Baltic states. So the East, historically, has always had an important place in Polish foreign policy. And naturally, if the relation that Poland has with the Western countries, being a member of the EU, and strong ties with the US, with NATO, so its foreign policy is giving a growing importance to the East. In terms of investment in the military expenditure by as a percentage of GDP of NATO member states, there is only one country of Eastern Europe that spends more than Poland, Estonia. Two countries that fear some intervention of Russia in the national territory. Poland, in the last year, spent 1.8% of GDP on defense. So this is also showing what is the importance that Poland has in this region and as a NATO member state. We can question if Poland is also trying to recover some of the historical role as a regional power. When we look at the interwar period, in the beginning of the 20th century, we have some writings stating that geographically, Poland is not a lucky country. It was between two main powers, between Germany and between Russia. So, what Poland effectively do? Try to build some alliances, and we have two main proposals made in this period. The first one was trying to destroy the Russian Empire, the so-called Prometheus, but the Intermediate Federation is perhaps the most interesting proposal, creating a federation of countries coming from Finland to the Black Sea, which will act like a kind of alliance against the expansion of Russia and eventually of some militarism of Germany. So nowadays, Poland tries effectively to constitute itself as a strong regional power, not only looking to the east, but also looking to Central Europe. built in the V4, and looking to the Baltic Sea region with the announcement of the Baltic Sea states. For example, Poland will assume the presidency.
Yes, it's going to be 2015, second part, and I think that's happening.
So, quite soon. So actually, Poland tries to act in several sub-regional aspects of European security. So clearly stating itself as an important actor in Central and Eastern Europe. This cannot be made alone. Poland still has strong diplomatic ties with Romania. So Poland still has strong diplomatic ties with Turkey, which have 600 years, I guess.
Yes,
Like
exactly. This year is the year of the anniversary of 600 years of
So-
establishment of the nations.
Naturally, Poland tries to play all the cards that she has in the European scene, maintaining a strong relationship with the West, with Germany, France, through the Wagner Triangle, expanding its relation with the other big six, UK, Spain, and Italy, and naturally at the local level with these close neighbors. Looking at what was happening in Ukraine, we can say that we had a small victory of Polish diplomacy with the sending of some troops by NATO to the region. Was it a definitive victory of Polish diplomacy? Well, I'm not sure about that, because effectively we do not have definitive basis of NATO in the region. Still, and just to conclude, what I can say that Poland is an important regional actor. It is because it's an economic power, of course, but also because of strong diplomacy and strong diplomatic networks through Europe. We cannot think of any solution for the EU-Russian relations without Poland. And one question that you asked is that there is a Europeanization of Polish foreign policy, or, on the contrary, is there a Polonization of part of European foreign policy, namely the Eastern Partnership? And the issue of Ukraine also needs integrations with Poland. With the change of the Polish foreign ministry, we are seeing that Poland is not being so assertive in what needs to be done towards Ukraine. Still, there is no major change in the position of Poland versus the position of Ukraine, and eventually its EU membership.
We'll now move to question time. I believe we'll have several. I'm going to take the honors to read, starting with Inês and who else? Well, we'll start with you, Inês, and then we'll go on.
My name is Inês Marques. I'm a student and a teacher here at ISCTE. I wonder whose influence seems to be stronger in the, what we call the Eastern Partnership area, what Russians call it. Whose influence seems to be stronger, if the EU's influence or Russia's? And if I wonder if do Polish foreign policy efforts actually make a difference in furthering the EU's agenda or interest, I dare say, in the area?
Any other questions right now?
Of course, my question is to the Professor. Professor, you are right. You have different propositions in Europe. We have technologies, we have globalization, we have United Nations organization, But in my opinion, the European project has been destroyed. If you look to Portugal, Greece, Spain, or Hungary, you only see social disasters. In Portugal, for example, you only see immigration and the unemployment. The Europeans don't believe in European Union. In my opinion, the nationalism are gaining force again. Europe lives in a very dangerous moment. Hungary, for example, in my opinion, is the best example. If you look to Hungary, Hungary don't live in a democracy. Journalists can't attack the regime. In my opinion, soon they can be still because Hungary in my opinion, don't have a democracy. In Spain or France, for example, the anti-system parties are the favorite. Podemos in Spain and the National Front in France. They are against they reject the European project, and the risk of gaining elections are real. In my opinion, the end of the European project are an open door for new Hitlers and new Stalins, independent of the new world propositions. That's my opinion. Thanks.
So, another question?
My name is Katrina. I'm a student of ISCTE IUL program of economics. Just one point about democracy that my colleague is stressed about, that, for example, like to speak in the European Union, especially a situation in Spain that we have right now, there are referendum in Catalonia that results haven't been accepted by government. Of course, the same situation was in Scotland, as far as I know. But still, it shows us that there is not enough, maybe, democracy in the European Union. But the main point of mine is not about democracy, it's about the situation of Ukraine, what you were discussing a lot this evening. I have a couple of thoughts, but like the most important, I think that if to speak about good relationship between the European Union and Russia, who is more interested in getting this good relationship, European Union or Russia? Because from the perspective of energy, I think that the European Union is much more interested in having good relationship with Russia. And second point is that if to look for the crisis in Ukraine that appears after getting closer to EU membership, we can think that Russia is really afraid of having their neighborhood countries as a EU member. So maybe there is some reason that we should think about on the way of getting closer European Union to Russia, because I'm not sure that Russia really wants to be that close to European Union, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator. We politicians, and after 21 years in the Parliament, I should consider myself a politician. We are famous for not keeping our promises. But this time I'm going to keep my promise, and the promise is when I was speaking there, I said there was a third motive of honor to be here. And but I said I was going to say it later, so I say it now. And the third motive of honor to be here is that I've read the articles of Professor Freire, and I also have read your articles. Actually, one of your articles ends the same way you ended your conference. And your articles are the same line you have shown. And I would say, and I'm saying right now, that the level of people knowing Eastern Europe here in Portugal might be even higher than in Spain. I congratulate you. It's an honor for me to be with such great professors and who know this issue so well. Now, the questions that have been raised. I am going to answer to 3 points. One point is democracy. One point is the European Union. And one point you raised, Professor Freire raised, was the values. You said values shouldn't be imposed. Values are an option. That's also my opinion. Now, the European Union. I ended my words with reference to the European Union, saying it's not clear they know what's going on in Ukraine. I know that Polish know it, but this question I raised means also another question that I didn't raise is, does the European Union know exactly what they want about themselves? So I hereby answer your question. I think you mentioned that the bureaucrats in Brussels, they don't know anything about Europe and maybe nothing about anything. They know how to have a chair where they sit and they have money every month. But that's it. So Europe is in a crisis. I don't share your opinion that are going to be Hitlers and Stalins out of that. We are totally different from our own story. But Europe has problems. And that said, I'm going to mention something important that happened. This connects me to the values in Russia. I was invited, and again, Kasia, thank you very much. I say Kasia Gledowska, who invited me, I think it was 4 years ago, to something very important that happened in Russia, which was the Forum Russia-European Union. And in this forum, the most important question that was raised is the Russia taking seriously the European Union? Now, the answer turns to be out that no. Russia takes serious Berlin, Paris, London, Lisbon. They prefer the bilateral relations, but the European Union, no, they didn't care about the European Union, even with the sanctions. The sanctions, they know it's a mistake, okay, they retaliated. So again, I say what I said before, Poland has a key role, and the Institute for Eastern Studies has shown it. For example, in this seminar, this conference that was organized in Poland. But there's also the issue of the values. Which values should they impose or not? It was a very interesting discussion in this forum about the values. And the Europeans said, no, our values are the best ones. The Americans said, of course, our values are eternal ones. But then there was a member of parliament from Kabarina-Balkaria who said, well, our first value is the tradition. So if we want to impose you the tradition, and there was no answer. There was even someone who said, well, my first value is Pushkin, okay. So, slippery grounds. European Union, I gave you my answer. I also gave you my answer on the European Union. We are in a crisis. And values, slippery ground. Third, and here I end this small intervention, democracy. What's exactly democracy? I mean, democracy, someone said about what's happening in Catalonia, what happens about Podemos. The problem in many European countries is that democracy, the concept of democracy is changing. The representative democracy, in which I believe, because I've been elected 6 times to represent my electors, and I believe in that, well, now it doesn't exist so much. People are more it's more than a democracy, it's a partitocracy in many European countries. In many European countries, I would point out the example of Germany. Okay, you're elected. The party tells you, vote this. Say, well, no, my electors don't want that I vote this. So I vote against. Well, next time you are wiped off from the list, you're the dead as a politician. Is that a democracy? That's a partitocracy. I would rather think that when we speak about democracy, also we should know what we are speaking. Democracy is changing. Actually, I'm sure that in 10, 20 years, we're going to speak about the post-democracy, same as we also speak about the post-modern.
It was a challenging last comment. I'll just add a couple of notes to what was said with regard to the neighboring area, the shared neighborhood, and whose influence is stronger, whether Russia or the EU have a stronger say in this area. It was Ines who formulated this question. And basically it's hard to tell in that sense. Basically Russia defines these areas of primary interest calls it sphere of influence, area of vital interest. Find many ways of defining this area. But in reality, it has no unlimited leverage over this area, these countries. And basically, in these last 25 years, the post-Soviet republics evolved differently and became very heterogeneous. We talk about post-Soviet space, but what are we talking about? It's a very heterogeneous area with countries that are very close to Russia, but with other countries that follow a very independent path in relation to Russia. Georgia, for example, is a very good example here, or Armenia, who is very, very dependent on Russia. And so you have very different countries in this area. Basically, regarding these in-between countries, so Moldova, Ukraine, and Belarus, clearly there has been these countries have been, EU and Russia have been kind of seeking to gain influence somehow and to attract them towards their model of development, let's put it this way, but it has been not really easy to say this is black, this is white. And this is why many times when we discuss Ukraine, I many times argue that it will be very hard to find a political solution for Ukraine, not accommodating EU interests or not accommodating Russian interests. These countries are in between these two big projects, and somehow there is a need to find a balance that will kind of respect their integrity, which has already been violated in the case of Ukraine, but respecting their integrity will allow the development of relations. Look, what has been the history of Ukraine since its independence? Balancing its relations with the EU and Russia. It has been a constant foreign policy of balancing. Then came the Vilnius Summit, and then came this economic agreements which clashed somehow. Basically, Ukraine could not sign up to both projects, and then it had to make an option. That's where the problem lies. On the issue about EU and Russia and who is more interested in having good relations with the other, and you came up with the example about energy and how Europe is so dependent on energy resources from Russia. I would argue clearly this is a two-way relationship, and this has become even more clear now with the Ukraine crisis. And as much as Europe needs gas and oil, Russia needs stable markets and needs stable buyers that will pay the products. So even when we talk about this huge agreement that Russia signed with China in this look for alternatives, Europe, the EU has also been looking for other alternatives in energy terms, so everyone is looking for alternatives. But clearly, this agreement with Russia does not substitute at all the big relationship that Russia and the EU have regarding energy. So I would say it's a two-way relationship. And so basically, not only on energy, but on many other issues, because if you think most of the challenges we face today, the menaces are transnational in nature. And so somehow, if we talk about organized crime, if we talk about counterterrorism, all these areas that are problematic, we need to have some kind of model of governing our relations, in the sense that it's important for both, I would argue. And let's see.
Following your question, what was said by Raquel, I think that what can be the influence of both these approaches countries? Well, it will depend on several factors. It will depend on the political elites of the countries at the moment. It will depend on the economic conjuncture at the moment. For example, Belarus, or even with Lithuania, which is not a country of the Eastern Partnership. If you have one political elite which is more nationalist, if you want, you will see some tensions in relation. So the influence of the other country will be very limited. Still, the economic relations still exist because of this of the relation with the state. So what we sometimes see at the high level politics have not the same repercussions at the level of the economic relations with the state. Is question of the sanctions to Russia. The same day the first sanctions were signed, Total, the French oil company, signed contracts with Gazprom. So, exactly. Yeah, but that's the thing. Poland can have an influence, had a strong influence in the creation of this instrument, of this partnership, in cooperation with the state, Sweden, essentially, also with some countries of the Visegrad group. It's not a mere coincidence that this partnership was officially launched in the first summit. But we also have to understand how the Council of Eastern Partnership will look at what sometimes becomes interference of Poland in international matters, in international interests. We cannot forget that Poland, Ukraine, was a strong cultural center of the Polish culture. And if you heard this kind of news saying that Putin proposed to divide Ukraine between Poland and Hungary, Romania, if it's true or not, I don't know. Maybe not. But it can be somehow seen as a kind of pressure put in the management way to say that you see Poland does not really want Ukraine to be a country, we just want to recover these lost territories. So, of course, Poland has, again, this influence, namely by financing civil society institutions, some education at the local level, and you see Lithuania doing kind of the same, for example, with a free Belarusian university, which is in Vilnius, I guess, so for the Belarusian elites. And we have to look at all these factors and also do some momentum in history.
Okay, thank you. Now we have to move to the closing session. We are already ahead of time, but within the time of the session, there's just half an hour. And I would like you to join me clapping to our invited session. On behalf of the Polish organizers, I'd like actually to thank you, the distinguished host, for having us here in ISCTE-IUL de Lisbon, distinguished professors, the rectors who must have left us, the guests from the university, distinguished speakers, and very, very special thanks for having us. It's a great honor, great pleasure. Obrigada, muito obrigada. A special thanks to the students who were very patient, who came, who gave all their time. We do appreciate that. I'd like actually to give special thanks also to and recognition to Polish students, because it's something really, really special to us. Because as you can see, the report, it's here. Transitions and the demographic changes started 25 years ago, but they started in Poland. So that was very significant time for us, for Poles. And there was the time that these young people were born, yes? So you can observe the changes. We can, as the guest said, we need to build the bridges, yes? So we start building the bridges on a personal level, on institutional level,
on a political level, on business level. We are very delighted to have on our many levels starting this cooperation, and we very much in this very moment like to give special thanks to Professor Katia Miriam Costa and Professor Sandro Mendonca. If it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't be here. So we're absolutely grateful. Thank you, Katia. Muito obrigada. That's very special. And to our great supporters also from Spain, Luis. If it hadn't been for you and the other guests, thank you, professors. It's really a great pleasure. Now it's time for us to invite you to Poland so that you can feel the vibrancy of Poland, so that you can see the dynamics. We've prepared a little presentation, but I know that you have the classes. So what I'd like actually to only say, if you just refer to that website, www.economic.forum, you will find all the information about what we do. Our greatest event is the Economic Forum in Krynica. It's southern Poland. It's often referred to as Davos of Central and Eastern Europe. So Katia and Sandra have been, Luis have been. We would be really grateful to have you there, to feel Poland, to see the dynamics, to see the changes. This is a wonderful platform for political cooperation, institutional cooperation, and also personal cooperation. As it's been said here, we need to build the bridges, we need to strengthen the cooperation, and we are absolutely grateful to you for helping us doing so and starting that. So we only believe that it's just the beginning of this cooperation, and we'll be very pleased to see you in Poland. If you need any contact, I'm here. Kinga is here. We are available. Professor Katia and Professor Sandra, they have the contacts, and we will be very pleased to continue further cooperation. Muito obrigada.
Well, my name is Nuno Guimarães. I'm Vice Rector for International Relations here. No, it's okay, it's okay. I'm glad we still have something. I want to thank you, the co-organizers of this meeting. You have probably heard this in the beginning of the sessions, that we have a growing community of Polish students here, and of outgoing students of Portugal to Poland too. I would like to thank the organizers from outside of ISCTE, the professors. If not for Sandra Mendoza, I would be here also, and Katia. So I hope it was interesting for everyone in the beginning for the work and study, and of course fun, which is also very important. Thank you very much for staying till the last minute. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
But I have to do two very important people who were in the organization. This is Ana Ribeiro, that I don't know where she is. João Dias. They are key persons when we do this kind of events, so it's very important to recognize their work. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.